On January 15th of 2019, Entertainment Weekly broke the scoop that a new Ghostbusters movie is not only in development, but already far along, and an announcement teaser was released one day later. The planned upcoming movie is Ghostbusters 3, the direct follow-up to the original movies. Just like Paul Feig's 2016 female-centric Ghostbusters remake sought to negate and replace the original movies, this one negates Paul Feig's remake, and that has stirred up some controversy. While the announcement was celebrated by the fans of the franchise, the decision to ignore the female-centric remake has been widely derided and heavily criticized by numerous media outlets and other commentators, as they deem this move as a victory for the misogynist, racist, basement-dwelling man-child. They proclaim anyone who didn't enthusiastically support the female-centric remake to be. In the week following the announcement, director Jason Reitman has been called out, President Trump has been implicated, and the original Ghostbusters has been labeled as overrated and not worthy of the praise it's getting. All told, emotions are high, the offense is deep, and the pitchforks are ready. How on earth could merely announcing a new Ghostbusters movie turn into something this controversial? Who is to blame? Let's take a deep breath, explore some context, and find out. In this editorial, I will first give my take on what makes the original such a beloved classic, and recap how what initially started out as Ghostbusters 3 ended up as Paul Feig's remake. Then I'll move on to how that unwanted remake became a symbol, and still flopped, before moving on to how this new movie could get announced, and if there is any chance the current pushback may ultimately prevent it from getting made. The original Ghostbusters was the perfect movie at the perfect time. Coca-Cola, the owners of Columbia at the time, marketed the hell out of it. So the movie held its own against Gremlins that came out that same weekend. It also coincided with the growth of VHS, leaving many more to discover it in the secondary market. As for the movie itself, many might dismiss the original Ghostbusters as just a comedy, but that is doing the movie a great disservice, because it is so much more than that. The actors in it are primarily associated with comedy, and the movie does have comedic elements, but at the core, it is a story about three men that engage in the high-risk gamble it is to incur great debt to launch a startup and be able to live and thrive on that, despite the additional complication of having to navigate official bureaucracy. The whole movie is then wrapped into a supernatural setting, something Dan Aykroyd in particular was very sincere about, and to top it off, it was lit and shot like the horror movies of the time. The end result was a movie not quite like any other, and despite a somewhat lesser sequel, Ghostbusters has come to be an institution in its own right. There were many that wanted a third Ghostbusters movie featuring the original cast, including original director Ivan Reitman and said original cast, except Bill Murray, who was always a bit more reluctant. That reluctancy honestly held up a third movie for decades, because no studio wanted to invest in another Ghostbusters without him, and with time, it fell off the radar. Many years later, in the aftermath of the Ghostbusters video game, a third movie would once again enter development. By then though, it was imagined as a passing of the torch movie, one where the original team, now old men, would train a new batch of recruits. Alas, this never came to pass either, not because of Murray, but because then Sony Pictures chairman Amy Pascal did not believe in director Ivan Reitman or his vision. She therefore eventually hijacked the project and gave it to director Paul Feig, who would proceed with his female-centric remake instead. The detailed process on how this happened was documented exclusively by Midnight's Edge after the notorious 2014 hack made Sony's internal correspondence accessible. If you haven't seen our earlier coverage on the matter, do so now. Here it should be noted that when the passing of the torch incarnation of Ghostbusters 3 was being developed under director Ivan Reitman, the new team was always meant to consist of both men and women. Fans following the development of Ghostbusters 3 were happy with this, because no one ever demanded that a new Ghostbusters movie had to feature an exclusively male team. There was never any battle of the sexes associated with the Ghostbusters. Even Ghostbusters Extreme had ladies on the team, and no one minded. In fact, the only thing that fans demanded of Ghostbusters 3 was that it be just that, Ghostbusters 3, a sequel and direct continuation of the previous two. Because the one thing fans absolutely did not want, under any circumstance, no matter who starred in it, was a remake that negated the continuity of the originals. Any remake that did that, even if it had featured an all-male team, would have been met with nothing but scorn from the fans. If you want an example of this, look no further than most franchises that got remakes instead of the continuations the fanbase actually wanted. In some cases, the original series carried on after the remake failed to spawn sequels of its own, so this is not the first. But Paul Feig didn't just do the one thing fans did not want when he opted for a remake. He added insult to injury by applying his usual shtick. What Paul Feig is most known for is making female-centric parodies of popular movies, franchises or tropes, like how Bridesmaids was a female-centric Hangover parody, and Spy was a female-centric James Bond parody. That's cool, no one minded that. There's room for that in the marketplace. But if Spy had been an official Agent 007 reboot and been called Jane Bond instead, and the audience had been told, this is your new James Bond, all the previous movies have been wiped out of film continuity, going forward there will only be Melissa McCarthy's Jane Bond. It would not have gone down well, no matter how progressive some talking heads would have labeled it. Well, that is pretty much what Feig actually did with the Ghostbusters. For reasons that don't make sense to anyone but her, Amy Pascal gave Paul Feig, a maker of gimmicky parodies, the keys to a main franchise, and rather than making a legitimate Ghostbusters movie, he did what he does, and made his usual female-centric parody of one. He even upped it up a few notches. While his previous movies have had one or two men with some redeeming features in them, every single male character in his Ghostbusters is either inept, incompetent, an idiot, an asshole, or some combination of all of the above. Paul Feig has always been open about the fact that he can't bond with or relate to other men, but with his Ghostbusters, he took the leap into downright misandrous territory. So, to summarize so far, Amy Pascal hijacked the Ghostbusters 3 that fans wanted, gave the keys to Paul Feig, and Feig then made the remake that fans absolutely did not want. Most of the fans of the original were lost already there. But on top of that, Feig approached it as a gimmicky parody, and he added outright misandry to the female-centric direction. He turned Ghostbusters into a battle of the sexes, which is something that no fans, male or female, ever wanted. As such, what should otherwise have been the built-in audience were turned off the moment the movie was announced, let alone when the first trailer started showing, and the first one went on to become the most disliked trailer of all time. The second one might have topped it, had it not been for the fact that it was officially released on so many different channels, specifically so that the dislikes would be more evenly spread out. Because make no mistake about it, the fans, both the hardcore and more casual ones, both male and female, were pretty unison in their condemnation of how the original movies appeared to be disrespected by the remake. And the biggest bone of contention was just that. The movie was a remake. I tend to believe that if the movie had been pretty much the same as it is, but had been called Spirit Chasers or something like that instead, and had been released as a normal standalone Paul Feig parody, like Spy or Bridesmaids, without any official Ghostbusters connection, no one would have minded. Ghostbusters even grossed about the same as Spy did worldwide. Although somewhat embarrassingly, Spy was the one that grossed more, and cost a whole lot less to make. But as the only Ghostbusters going forward, there was no way that audiences would be won over by the approach taken. There was no way it would ever gross more than it did. There was no way it would ever become a hit. I am of the opinion that the moment Amy Pascal greenlit Paul Feig's take, it was destined to join the ranks of every other failed remake ever. Brief marketing blitz, a splash when it opened, followed by a quick collapse, and then but a footnote forever after. And from a financial point of view, the only point of view that really matters to the studio, that was indeed what happened. But by the time the movie ultimately came out and bombed, it had already won over the media and the talking heads and the punditry. Paul Feig's Ghostbusters had come to represent something else to another crowd altogether that had never cared about Ghostbusters before. We do not like to talk personal politics here at Midnight's Edge, so we try to avoid the topic whenever possible. There are, however, occasions when no analysis can be complete without addressing the climate in which any given movie was made and released, and this is the mother of all such occasions. So please bear with me as I give my take on what transpired. There is a cultural war going on in the Western world, and our movies and entertainment have very much so become part of an ideological battleground, however regrettable that might be. This did not begin in 2016, but that was the year it took on a whole new level. The intersectional ideology had gained a significantly stronger foothold. Hillary Clinton was pretty much already declared to be the next president of the United States, and to shatter the proverbial glass ceiling in the process. A social movement was in progress, and it affected everything. 1 year later, this movement would help propel Wonder Woman to its massive success, in the domestic market that is. But that was a year later. In 2016, the only 4-quadrant tentpole summer blockbuster which could be construed as empowering women was Paul Feig's Ghostbusters remake. Ordinarily, it shouldn't have gotten much more attention than last year's Ocean 8 did, but due to the timing of its release, it got caught up in a movement, and it became associated with presidential candidate Hillary Clinton.
And now they're making Ghostbusters with only women! What's going on?
The director, cast, and crew loved this, and made it clear that they were with her, despite Sony's reluctance. Over the course of the months leading up to its release, the female-centric Ghostbusters, a remake of a beloved franchise previously starring men, became a symbol of female empowerment, of changing times. As such, Paul Feig's Ghostbusters was gradually declared and ratified by the blogs and media covering the film industry as an important movie, and the evaluation of it took on a political dimension. If you were a good person, in favor of equality and modern values, you had to like it. Because if you didn't, well, that could only mean that you must be a horrible person. However, even if some very loud voices in the media had selected Paul Feig's Ghostbusters as a cause to rally behind, it was still the remake that fans never wanted, regardless of their political affiliation, and they let that fact be heard from the rooftops. Most were constructive in their criticism, some weren't. All were labeled as haters and losers regardless, without any kind of distinction. Judd Apatow took it to the next level when he labeled anyone critical of the movie as Trump supporters. Sony's marketing machine also latched onto this narrative and had the cast and director attack the fans in both social media and in talk shows. The battle lines were drawn by the media and by Sony's marketing department. No criticism was valid. You either loved the movie or you were a misogynist, racist, basement-dwelling, Trump-supporting man-baby. Details, such as a good chunk of the fan base being women, statistically half being Hillary supporters, and probably just a tiny minority being actual basement-dwelling man-babies, were summarily ignored. No holds were barred, and even the mainstream media named and shamed James Rolfe for not having any interest in reviewing the movie, and assigned opinions to him that he never expressed. Women critical of the movie, however, were completely ignored and treated as if they didn't exist. Their criticism didn't fit the narrative that was being pushed. This here, you will love it, or you are a horrible person type of marketing that we today also know from Star Wars and Star Trek, had at the time been done once before, in Fantastic, but it was perfected with Ghostbusters. Keep in mind, this was still before the movie was actually released, a movie that the fans still never wanted. As it turned out, neither did the general audience. The media and punditry had made a horrible choice of movie to rally behind. When it did open, the positive reviews didn't help. The audience they expected to make the movie a hit never showed up. On the contrary, the movie bombed, losing the studio upwards of $100 million by the time all was said and done. Although not announced to the public, the cinematic universe the movie was intended to start was dead by the time of the second week of release. Given all the meaning and importance assigned to Paul Feig's Ghostbusters, this was pretty embarrassing for everyone involved in campaigning for it. The aftermath is well known, but highlights include Leslie Jones being subjected to racist attacks, Milo Yiannopoulos being banned from Twitter and exposed to a whole new audience because of it, and Leslie Jones being hacked and having her nude pictures leaked online. Oh, and then Trump won the election. Not saying that had much to do with the Ghostbusters, but all told, Paul Feig's Ghostbusters hadn't worked out so well for anyone involved or associated with it. Not the cast, not the director, not Hillary, and least of all the studio and its investors that lost upwards of $100 million on Feig and Pascal's folly. That begs the question, how come Sony are now in the process of making another? Outside of director Paul Feig, the person the single most responsible for his Ghostbusters was, as we've seen, his enabler Amy Pascal. She was the Sony Pictures chairman at the time the movie was announced, but by the time it opened, she had already been demoted because of the Sony hack, and replaced by Tom Rothman. Pascal's superior when the movie entered production, Sony Entertainment CEO Michael Linton, also left the company a few months later, for unrelated reasons. As such, no one currently in charge at Sony had anything to do with how that movie turned out, or more importantly, for taking the project away from Ivan Reitman to begin with. Meaning, they haven't burnt any bridges with him or the original cast, and that actually matters a great deal. Reitman and Aykroyd still have to sign off on any future Ghostbusters movie, as they do own a stake in the franchise. Also, Sony are still in need of franchises, and Ghostbusters still has the potential to be just that, so they decided to give the brand another go. But this time, there will be more scrutiny before they commit. If they are unsure, they can, at the time of making this video, still pull the plug. To be clear, Paul Feig's brand of Ghostbusters is finished. Sony knows pursuing a sequel to that would be financial suicide, because even if everyone who ever praised the first one saw it and bought a copy afterwards, no one else did. We no longer have a Sony hack to provide reliable intel. But from what I'm hearing, Sony are very well aware of just how badly Feig's movie damaged the brand value. That allegedly is the real reason Dan Aykroyd called out Paul Feig in such a public manner on Britain's Channel 4 in the summer of 2017.
You know, the director, he spent too much on it, and he didn't shoot scenes we suggested to him. Several scenes that were going to be needed, and he said, no, we don't need them. And then we tested the movie, and they needed them, and he had to go back, and about 30 to 40 million in reshoots, so yeah. Wow. So he will not be back on the Sony line anytime soon.
Sony would later claim that the reshoots only cost 3 to 4 million, not 30 to 40 as Aykroyd claims. Whatever the actual money spent on the reshoots, the far bigger problem that the movie cost too much was that it grossed way too little, and Aykroyd knows it. He isn't just a hired actor, but a stakeholder in the Ghostbusters franchise, which he has invested his heart and soul into. Allegedly, this outburst was his way of publicly telling Feig, "You destroyed my legacy, you son of a bitch," only in more diplomatic terms. Be that as it may, Sony's thinking is reportedly that the only way the brand can possibly be saved is by returning to the original continuity and have the original team train a new batch of recruits that will be seen as legitimate heirs and carry the franchise forward. And even that is a gamble. The brand may be too damaged for even that to work. What certainly does not help matters is the very loud, very public outcry by the very same media, journalists and punditry that praised Paul Feig's sticky and ultimately failed remake as the most important movie of the year. Since this latest incarnation of Ghostbusters 3 was announced, director Jason Reitman, son of Ivan Reitman, an established director in his own right, has been called out and accused of nepotism, Leslie Jones has invoked Trump, and Paul Feig, albeit in more diplomatic terms, supported her statement. On top of that, more articles than can be counted all say, in not so many words, that it is problematic that the haters and misogynists and racists got their way. Which is ironic, as it is the authors of those very articles that lumped all fans who just wanted the third Ghostbusters movie in with the comparatively few actual racists and misogynists that there were. Because I'm not saying that there weren't any, only that the impression created that all Ghostbusters fans are like that was never true. But what is in print doesn't have to be true. The issue here is that the kind of reaction we're seeing from the media could very well cause Sony to get cold feet and pull the plug on the whole thing. Even if the movie has been given a release date of July 10th of 2020, release dates are cheap at this early juncture. This is a high-risk project for them, as is. If the media is intent on labeling the original Ghostbusters as racist and misogynist by association alone, it might be very tempting for them to let the Ghostbusters rest in peace once and for all. What do you think will happen? Is the backlash against Ghostbusters 3 warranted? Will it ever see the light of day, or will Sony get spooked by the headlines and pull the plug? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.